Now, looking at receiving yards, Jackson Smith-Njigba has 1,709 yards, so he's well over 100 yards a game. Welcome to Just the Stats, NFL Top 10's for Friday. My name's Ernie Jennings. I'm your host, and we are going to be talking about the season leaders going into the last week of the season, and I'm looking forward to it. The NFL has scheduled the games pretty well, so you got some really big key games happening on Saturday and Sunday, so I'm looking forward to that. Now, hope you all had a happy new year. No NFL football on Thursday, not on Monday either. We're down to the weekend. And at least there's some games on Saturday, a couple games. And but anyway, a new year. First podcast of 2026. How amazing is that? So I'm looking forward to continually improving my podcast, coming up with some other ideas when I have the time. Man, it's been kind of busy with Christmas, New Year's, and stuff to do any changes. It's been enough just to kind of keep up with the podcast, honestly, with these charts and stuff. But next year I'll have more of an idea of what I'm doing before I get into the season, so I'll be more ready for that kind of a thing. But anyway, appreciate all the subscribers. I've been getting some new subscribers, and I appreciate that. And always you can subscribe. Seems like YouTube is where most of them are coming from. At Just the Stats NFL, you can find the YouTube podcast, which I always say is where the charts are. And if you're watching the video version, you see the charts of what I'm going to talk about. So as like today, I'm going to talk about the season leaders. So let's kick it into gear here on this new year, and let's look at some of these leaders. Some really interesting key things going on that could affect different categories. Who's going to be the number one person in a certain category? So let's start with the top 10 season leaders in passing yards. Well, last week it was Matthew Stafford. He had jumped over Dak Prescott. Well, Dak Prescott got the lead back and now has a little bit of a lead, about 34 yards over Matthew Stafford. So Dak Prescott has 4,482 yards. Matthew Stafford has 4,448 yards. Those two are really the only two fighting it out. And I'm assuming at this point that they're both playing on Saturday or Sunday, whenever they're playing. But those two are the top two players. They've got a 200-yard lead over Jared Goff, who's in third with 4,233. Drake May is fourth. And then there's another way big drop down to Sam Darnold, who has 3,850. So you've got four players with 4,200 yards or more. And then the next player, Sam Darnold, has 3,850. So it's kind of a big drop there. So we'll see who wins the passing yards leadership. And I'm looking at this also because Drake May is about 245 yards behind Matthew Stafford as far as who is going to be the MVP. I think it's one of those two, Matthew Stafford, Drake May. So let's look at some other numbers. Matthew Stafford leads in passing yards. In passing touchdowns, Matthew Stafford has a huge lead in this category. He's got 42 passing touchdowns so far this season. Next up is Jared Goff with 33. So we're talking about a 9 touchdown difference. Drake May has 30, so he's 12 behind in the passing touchdown category. Then looking at passing interceptions on the negative side here. Well, Geno Smith has this pretty much wrapped up, I believe. He's got 17 interceptions so far this season. Tua Tagovailoa has 15, but he didn't even play last week or the week before, and I don't think he'll play on Sunday either, so he should stick at 15. And then Sam Darnold for the Seahawks has 14, which really is interesting He's got a lot of interceptions, and yet they're one of the best teams record-wise. And I do have them as my number one team in the power rankings. I don't feel good about it, honestly. I don't, I have them there. They did beat the Rams last time, and they have won some games. But to be honest with you, I don't see them making it to the Super Bowl. And I could be completely wrong. I just don't know why, but I don't have a lot of faith in them as far as how far they're going to make it in the playoffs. But those are your top three in interceptions. Now, looking at quarterback sacks, Cam Ward and Geno Smith both have 55. Justin Herbert has 54. Those are your top three. There's a big drop to Drake May is fourth with 47. Now, that's a lot of sacks to be taking, for an MVP candidate. Now, Justin Herbert's not playing in his game on Saturday, or whatever day it is. So he's going to sit at 54. I don't even know if Geno Smith is playing for sure. And then there's Cam Ward, who really has slowed down. He had rocketed out to the lead, but they've kind of figured things out a little bit. And he's now sitting at 55, but he's slowed down the pace. Though they do play the Jaguars, Cam Ward. Jaguars only have 31 sacks this entire season, which is not one of the better numbers as far as that goes. But I hope they get, several more in their game against Tennessee Titans on Sunday. So I'm looking at some of the other ones. Trevor Lawrence has 39, but he kind of slowed down. He had 2 weeks, as I mentioned before, where he had 14 in 2 weeks. And then it's kind of simmered down a little bit there. Now, let's look at some of the leaders in rushing department. This is a two-man race, and James Cook has a fair lead now of 47 yards over Jonathan Taylor. So James Cook has 1,606 yards rushing to Jonathan Taylor, who has 1,559. Those are your top two. And as I've been mentioning each week, James Cook now is the only player who's averaging 100 yards per game rushing. Now, he didn't have that last week, but he was able to, with the previous weeks, still stay just above 100 yards a game. Jonathan Taylor's a little bit under that. And coming out of nowhere in the last several weeks, Derrick Henry is now third in rushing with 1,469. So he's backing up his 1,900-yard season last year quite well. In fact, he should end up possibly as high as 1,600 yards this year. Saquon Barkley made the top 10. He's got 1,140. So he ended up not too bad of a season, but way off of his previous season. Really hasn't been anywhere near what you might expect, at least what a lot of people expected from him this year. I mean, you always figured it was going to be a down year compared to last year. You're not going to rush for 2,000 yards 2 years in a row. But still, it was a bigger drop-off than I think a lot of people expected. In fact, the whole Eagles offense is it looks so convoluted or dysfunctional in some ways right now. And so we'll see how far they get, even though they're another team kind of like Seattle. I do not expect to see the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Now watch, I'll be proved wrong. It'll be Seattle versus the Eagles, but I don't think so. All right. Rushing touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor, now here's where he does lead. He has 18 rushing touchdowns. Derrick Henry's up here again. Last year, Derrick Henry led the league along with Cook and I believe it was Gibbs with 16 touchdowns. And Derrick Henry now has 16 again this year. That's because he had 4 touchdown rushes last week alone. But Jonathan Taylor has 18, Derrick Henry 16. And then you got Josh Allen with 14, quarterback right there. And James Cook, he's got 12. So between the two of them, they've got 26 touchdowns. It's pretty good. They get a lot, and that's one of the reasons Josh Allen, doesn't have as many passing touchdowns maybe as some other quarterbacks, because he runs it in himself so many times. Christian McCaffrey's in the top 10 in rushing with, he's got so many categories. He's an interesting player, but Christian McCaffrey has 10 rushing touchdowns, which is good enough to tie for 8th right now in the NFL. Now, looking at rushing yards by quarterbacks, Josh Allen has a big lead here, and he's going to hold it easily. He's got 579 yards rushing. Justin Herbert, 98. He's second, and he's not playing. And then Jackson Dart has 455. I do believe that Jackson Dart would have had this category if he'd have played, in every game. He would have easily, I think, had the record for that, or led the league, I should say. Those are your top ones. Drake May has 409 yards rushing. So there's Drake May, somewhere where you're not going to find Matthew Stafford anywhere near the top. He's more in the bottom 10, bottom 5 or so. All right, now let's move over to receptions. So here you've got Puka Nacua and Trey McBride. They both have 119 receptions. Jamar Chase has 117. And Jackson Smith-Njigba has 113. So those are probably your 4 players that have a chance to win the reception lead. And it's probably going to be Nacua, McBride. If Nacua is playing, we'll have to see. And then Chase. Chase won the reception and touchdown and yardage titles last year as far as receivers go. And right now he's only 2 out of the lead for receptions. So we'll see if he can get more receptions than McBride or Nacua. Nacua, despite missing a game, so did Chase, has really shot up here in the last few weeks, except for last week when Atlanta kind of held him down to only, I think it was 4 or 5 receptions in that game. All right. We got 6 players who have 100 or more receptions. Chris Olave joined the group, and as did Amon-Ra St. Brown. Both of those joined the 100 reception category. Olave has 100. St. Brown has 106 to join Smith-Njigba, Chase, McBride, and Nacua. Now, Christian McCaffrey again. Here he is. He's in the top 10 in rushing touchdowns. He's number 7 in receptions. He's the only running back on this list. In fact, he's got 96, so he only needs 4 receptions in his next game to get 100 receptions as a running back. Pretty impressive season for him. Now, looking at receiving yards, Jackson Smith-Njigba has 1,709 yards, so he's well over 100 yards a game there. And Puka Nacua has 1,639, so he's 70 yards behind Smith-Njigba. I don't know if he can catch him. He'd have to have another the game like he had where he had 225 yards, whatever it was. But those two are far out in the lead over everybody else, both averaging well over 100 yards. Well, 100 yards for Nacua and well over for Smith-Njigba. George Pickens is third with 1,420, so he's a good 200 yards behind Puka Nacua. So this is another category where you got a 2-man race between Smith-Njigba and Nacua. So that'll be fun to see what happens with that. Now, on this list, you do have George Pickens in third, like I said, with 1,420 yards. And you've got CeeDee Lamb, who's made it onto this list with 1,073. So even though CeeDee Lamb missed him a little bit of time, he still made it to 1,000 yards this season. So you got 2 Cowboys on this list with 1,000+ yards receiving. Now, looking at receiving touchdowns, despite the fact that Davante Adams is going to miss he's already missed 2 games, probably going to miss this next game. He'll probably end up as the leader in receiving touchdowns this year. He's got 14. And the next best is St. Brown for the Lions has 11. Trey McBride for the Cardinals has 11. And Dallas Goedert for the Eagles has 11. Now, Dallas Goedert, he doesn't get many receptions per game, but lately he seems at least one of those receptions is a touchdown. Also on this list, when we're talking about teams with a couple players, so you got Devontae Adams in first with 14, and you got Puka Nacua tied for seventh with 9. So between the two of them, they've got 23 receiving touchdowns. Pretty good team there. I'm really surprised by the way that they lost to Atlanta, the Rams, that is. And maybe Devontae Adams is a bigger plays a bigger role than it appears when you watch the games, I think it really helps out Puka Nacua when Devontae Adams is also on the field. All right, now let's look at receptions by running backs. Christian McCaffrey leads this category by a long shot. He's got 96 receptions, as I mentioned. Bijan Robinson for the Falcons has 76. He passed Jahmyr Gibbs, who has 74. Those are your top three. No one else has even 70. So that's been really an impressive couple of players. Bijan Robinson's been incredible. It's unfortunate, despite how well he's played, that the Falcons were not able to make it into the playoffs. And, they are kind of an interesting team because sometimes they look really good, as they did against the Rams, and sometimes you wonder what are they thinking. It's kind of an interesting team. So we'll see how they do next year, but they're done. Despite the fact that they could end up with a tie equal, all three of the top teams in their division would be 8-9. But the way the scenario works, the Carolina Panthers would still win the division. All right. So we've got Christian McCaffrey in 3 categories. And here's a fourth one. In receiving yards by running backs, Christian McCaffrey has 890 yards receiving yards as a running back. Bijan Robinson has 810. So there's 80 yards between the two of them. Christian McCaffrey, I know, was trying to get to 1,000 yards rushing and 1,000 yards receiving. Probably very doubtful. He's been really being held to more around 40 yards a game lately. So I don't see him quite making 110 yards unless he happened to have a big breakout run, a little screen pass that he runs for 80 yards or something like that. But I don't really see him getting 110 yards receiving. Not impossible, but last week he had 41 yards. So that kind of tells you it's not going to be easy. Though he did run for 140 yards last week, something like that. Now, those two players, McCaffrey and Robinson, are just way miles ahead of anybody else. Jahmyr Gibbs is third. And as I said, Bijan Robinson had 810 yards. Gibbs has 580. So you're talking about 230 yards difference between Robinson and then, 310 between Gibbs and McCaffrey. So huge difference there. Really big. Now, let's move on to touchdowns, total touchdowns so far this season. And that's Jonathan Taylor still. He's got 18 rushing. He's also got 2 receiving. So he's got a total of 20 touchdowns this season, which leads the NFL over Jahmyr Gibbs for the Lions, who has 17. And here he is again, Christian McCaffrey, who has 17. So Christian McCaffrey has 10 rushing touchdowns and 7 receiving touchdowns. Really split there pretty well. Derrick Henry is 4th with 16. So he's really improved his lot so far. Now on this list, you've got Josh Allen with 14 and James Cook with 14. So like I said, they've got 28 between them. And then you've got Devontae Adams with 14, which is good enough to tie for 5th. And you've got Kyren Williams with 13, good enough for tie for 9th. So between those two, they've got 27 touchdowns. So there's 2 teams here with 2 players on the top 10 list. All right, next up, longest field goal. This is kind of interesting. I wanted to see this, and I think I brought it up one other time maybe. So the top 9 players have kicked at least a 60-yard field goal. Cam Little leads the NFL all-time with a 68-yarder that he kicked, which is the NFL record. Chase McLaughlin had a 65-yarder this season. And then Brandon Aubrey had a 64 and a 63-yarder. He's the only one on here twice where he's had 2 kicks of 60-plus yards. But you got 9 players who have kicked, or 9 times, let me put it that way, 9 times, 8 players who have 9 times kicked a 60 or more yard field goal. Now, I looked at 2024. In 2024, only 3 kicks went 60-plus yards the entire season. We still have 1 game to go, so there's a possibility that we get another 60-plus yarder. But in 2024, you had Aubrey kicking a 65-yarder, and then you had a 63 and a 61-yard field goal. Those are your only ones that were 60-plus yards. This year, you've got 9. It just shows you the distance. I wouldn't doubt that next year we have more than 9. Now, sometimes, it's very situational. That kick that Cam Little had for the Jaguars that was set the NFL record came at the end of the first half. No time left. It was only a few seconds. So even if he missed it, there was nothing. The other team was not going to get a good position because the half is over. So it's very situational. I don't even think the coach, in just a typical situation, he might have punted, But in that particular situation, it was just so set right to give Cam Little the option, or the chance, I should say, to kick that field goal. When you're kicking 60-plus yarders, it really depends on the situation in the game that a coach is going to let you go out there and try it. Because, if he misses, the field position is incredible for the other team, I mean, he's kicking that field goal from his own, 50-yard line. And, so you're giving half the field up. All right, so I just wanted to bring that up about the longest field goal, 68 all the way down to 69 times 60 plus 60 or more. All right, let's look at the yards from scrimmage. And here's where Bijan Robinson is number 1. By a ways, actually. It'd been a battle for a while between Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, and Bijan Robinson. But Jonathan Taylor's really fallen off ever since Daniel Jones got hurt. His numbers have plummeted. And some of that has to do also with the fact that he played some more difficult teams. Played the Jaguars twice, who lead the NFL in yards allowed to running backs, and held Jonathan Taylor to 70 yards both games, somewhere around that. So really hurt his numbers. And he doesn't catch the ball as much as McCaffrey or Robinson. So Christian McCaffrey was up there for a while as well, but he kind of stalled, and then Bijan Robinson's had some big games. So Robinson now for the Falcons has 2,255 yards from scrimmage. Christian McCaffrey has 2,069. So you can see it's almost 200-yard difference. And Jonathan Taylor has 1,924. So he's quite a ways behind McCaffrey. So you really got 2 players here. And I don't see any way that, unless Bijan Robinson's not playing and Christian McCaffrey does, that Robinson doesn't win this category of yards from scrimmage and to lead the NFL in that particular category. Now, what I'll do in another podcast is look at some of these numbers and see how they fare in all-time NFL categories. We had a lot of people who were pushing possibilities of making it into NFL top 10 all time in their categories. Like Davante Adams, for example, and even Jonathan Taylor. They took off at such a fast pace. But then Davante Adams got hurt, and Jonathan Taylor, the touchdowns really dropped off. and then McCaffrey as well kind of slowed down. So it changed a lot. Now, looking at a couple more categories here on defense, tackles for loss. Myles Garrett, 32 tackles for loss. Max Crosby, second with 28. And then Brian Burns for the Giants has 21. So big drop off between those number 1 and 2 players and the third player. Garrett and Crosby just dominated in this category as far as tackles for loss. And in fact, though, Myles Garrett didn't have any last week. Max Crosby had a couple, but Max Crosby's out now. Put him on injured reserve. He's not playing anymore. So Myles Garrett has a chance. He won't catch J.J. Watt, who holds the record with 39. But he is second all time. Myles Garrett is second with 32. So he could improve on that a little bit. It's not the category he's really trying to improve on, though. He wants to improve on his sack total. Now, in this category of tackles for loss, here's another one where you have a couple of Texans. Will Anderson's fifth with 19. Daniel Hunter is eighth with 14. So between them, they have 33, which is one more than Myles Garrett has. That just shows you how great Myles Garrett's been this year. They're only team with 2 players on the list. All right, let's look at one more category here. And this is sacks. Myles Garrett has 22 sacks for the Browns right now. Next up is Brian Burns, who has 16.5. So 5.5 sack difference between Garrett and Burns. And then Daniel Hunter for the Texans has 14 sacks to be third. Those are your top 3 players. Now, this is, again, here's one where Daniel Hunter and Will Anderson flip-flopped, whereas in tackles for loss, Anderson leads the Texans. In sacks, Daniel Hunter leads the Texans. He's got 14. Will Anderson has 12. So between the two of them, they have 26 sacks for the Texans. You know what's interesting about this? The Broncos lead the NFL in sacks as a team, but Nick Bonito is the only one on the list, and he's got 12.5. That just shows you that they really have to be spreading these out among a lot of players to get to, they're in the 50s as far as sacks go. So they're really, man, they've got to have a lot of players from 10 to, the top 10 only runs down to 11 sacks. So they have to have some players. I should look it up at some point and just see how they're split, these sacks for the Broncos. All right. That's a look at that. I don't see another team. The Lions, here's one. Aiden Hutchinson for the Lions is fourth with 13.5 sacks. And then Al Quadin Muhammad has, for the Lions, also has 11. So between the two of them, they have 24.5 sacks. So in this category, Myles Garrett, according to the official numbers, needs a half a sack to tie for first all-time in sacks with 22.5. He needs 1 total to tie the unofficial record of 23. And then obviously he would set the official record as well if he can just get 1 sack. Man, he needed that last week. He just couldn't get it. So 1 more game to get a sack. You know what? I honestly think he'll get it. I just can't believe that the Browns will do everything in their power to make a way for him to get to a sack, you know? I mean, you only need 1 sack. All right, that's a look at some of our top 10s for this season. Got some players, some battles between different players in these categories, and it should be fun. I'd like to see McCaffrey get to 100 receptions, and like to see a good battle. I'd like to see Nakua at least, if he doesn't catch Smith the jig, but make it close, put some pressure on him as far as that goes. I don't even know if players really worry about that kind of thing, if they're going to lead in a certain category, like have the most receptions, though they might. You never know if they get some kind of a bonus in their contract for leading the NFL in certain categories, which they probably do. So we'll see what happens. And we'll see who has a better game between Drake May and Matthew Stafford. I think it could come down to this final game between the two of them. Who has a better game? Who puts up better numbers? And obviously, that'll be key. And I don't know how close it is in reality, but those seem to be the two players I hear talked about as far as MVP categories. Josh Allen was up there, but he didn't have a good game at all either, as did Matthew Stafford. And then, believe it or not, I heard Trevor Lawrence's name brought up, but not as somebody who actually win, but somebody who might get a few votes as a, third or fourth, fifth, however far down they vote, kind of on there. But the idea that he's even being mentioned, and that's all because of the last 5 weeks. If you went by the first 5 weeks of the season, he was a bottom half of the NFL as far as quarterbacks were going. But I don't know. The light switch turned on, and he's definitely been a new and improved quarterback for the Jaguars. Sorry to ramble on about the Jaguars, but sometimes when I'm looking at these numbers and I see Jaguars in the top 10 in different categories, I'm like, wow, that is new. You don't see that much. At least in the last few years, you don't see many Jaguars anywhere in the top 10 in any category. So it's kind of nice to see it for a change. All right, that is a wrap. I'm toying with the idea. I don't know if I will. It just depends on what's going on with me and in my situation at home, if I'm doing something or if I'm told I'm doing something. But I was thinking about doing a podcast even on Saturday night after the 2 games on Saturday, just to throw that in as kind of a bonus one, and then have another one on Monday, after all the Sunday games. There is no Monday night game, so I wouldn't have to worry about that either. So we'll see, but it's exciting. I'll be bringing up the season numbers for the entire season next week, and I'll throw in there also anybody who was able to make it in the top 10 all time in the NFL in a certain category in a season level. All right. Appreciate you listening. You can find this podcast on YouTube at Just the Stats NFL, where, as I've always say, you find the charts and everything. If you want to look at those, you can also just listen to it there, leave your comments. And as I said at the beginning, I appreciate you, all those who have subscribed. And you can also find the podcast, if you're just listening to it, driving, whatever you're doing, on Spotify, Apple, wherever you happen to get your podcasts, obviously. And appreciate, again, as I always say, thanks for listening. And that is a wrap for this episode of NFL Top 10s for Friday. I'll see you on Monday or maybe Saturday.